Hi, everyone. Sorry I can't be with you this week. I would much rather be in the classroom than dealing with the dentist, but life happens and so we must go on. So what I'm going to do in this video is a shortened version of what we would do in class. You'll still get the same information, but this way you're not having to watch an hour and a half long video. I want to talk about idea development, content development in body paragraphs, and then we'll also talk about introductions and conclusions. I'll have an example of a body paragraph and an introduction. I don't have a conclusion example yet. Okay, so when we think about content development, it's basically idea development. This is how you develop your ideas through the course of your paper. And the goal is that most of the paper should be your writing, not your sources. Your sources are there to back you up. They're a tool for you to use to make your case or to defend your position, but you don't want to rely on them to do the work for you. Your readers are going to expect you to be sort of like an expert in the field, and that's why they're reading your paper. If they wanted to just know what the other experts said or what your sources said, they would read those sources. So, and you also want to pretend like when you're writing that you're writing for people who either completely believe the opposite side of you as you, so you're trying to convince them. And you also are pretending like you're writing for people, or another way of looking at it is for people that have no idea about your topic. So if you just present them with information from your sources, neither one of those groups are going to find that valuable unless you tell them what to do with it. When we talk about developing content, this comes in to play when you introduce ideas, how you support those ideas, and then how you develop that support. One of the questions I get a lot, or stressors that are shared the most to me, either in that week one assessment that we do, or in workshopping, or just in talking to students, is how do I make my paper long enough? And what do I do with all this research now that I've found it? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do you develop the information from those sources, and how do you use those sources to work for you? And one of the ways that you can do that is through a technique called TTEIC, or a mnemonic device to remember is Tiny Tots Eat Ice Cream. But basically, in your body paragraphs, each of them should have a transition, a topic sentence, evidence, interpretation, and a connecting statement. And we'll talk about these each as we move forward. The only exceptions to this rule is your first body paragraph after your introduction doesn't need a transition because it's not transitioning from anything. And your connecting statement doesn't need to be included in the final body paragraph before your conclusion because you're not connecting it to a new idea. So the first thing that you'll do is the transition. Often these are combined with a topic sentence. So the first T's are often combined into one sentence. But it's something, a phrase or a sentence, and it's going to move your reader from one topic to the next topic. Or think of it as a bridge between from the paragraph before to the paragraph that you're writing now. It's the first thing in each body paragraph except for that first one. And it's phrases like however, to continue with, in contrast to, that's not the only, anything like that, that basically says, this is how we're moving forward. Often, the transition will also mention the idea that was mentioned in the paragraph before, as a way to move from that to this one. And then you have the topic sentence. Again, often it's combined with the transition. Every body paragraph will need a topic sentence. It conveys the main point. Think of it as a mini thesis statement that's going to help keep your writing on track and focused. It lets your readers know this is the topic of this paragraph. And if it doesn't connect to that topic sentence, it doesn't belong in the paragraph. after you have the topic sentence, that's when you bring in your evidence. This is that research you've been doing. This is your sources, your ideas, the support, expert opinions, quotes, statistics, anecdotes, or testimony. Bring them in and cite them. You'll want to introduce them with that attributed phrase, something like according to or in this article. And then you'll have that parenthetical at the end to kind of sandwich your evidence, unless you're using multiple pieces of evidence in the same sentence. And we'll look at an example of that. But basically, you start with transitioning in, then you have your topic sentence, and then you present your evidence, which is what you're using to support the idea that you've established in that topic sentence. And then your interpretation. This should be the biggest part of each body paragraph. This is your individual, independent analysis of the evidence. This is where you explain to your readers how this evidence relates to the main point of your paper and the main point of the paragraph. Often what we do is we think that if we get really into something and we're really passionate about our topics, which I think most of us are, we forget that people that are reading our paper aren't as passionate as us, and they may not understand the significance of a source or a quote or a statistic that like you do. So your goal here with the interpretation is to explain it. This should be a rule of thumb, is your interpretation should be as long as or longer than your evidence. What I'll do is I'll go through after I've written a paper, and either on the screen on Microsoft Word or by hand. I'm a very visual learner. I'll go through and I'll highlight all of the evidence. And the goal is that most of the paper shouldn't be highlighted. Interpretation here is where your readers are really going to understand how you're applying your evidence to defend your position. Use phrases like means, shows, proves to indicate that you're interpreting, but also explain to your reader, hey, this is what this means, and this is how it defends me. Your evidence, remember, should be a tool to support your ideas, and your interpretation is where you get to expand on those ideas and explain how you're using the tool of your evidence. And then the final thing is a connecting statement. It's kind of the reverse of the transition. So the transition and the topic sentence are basically like a mini thesis. Then the connecting statement is almost like a mini conclusion for that paragraph. And it gives a hint of what's to come. And maybe it'll show how your this paragraph connects to other ideas in your paper. It's a bridge to the next idea. So the transition is the bridge from the idea before. The connection is the first part, or the connecting statement is the first part of the bridge to the next paragraph. Again, you won't need this in your last body paragraph before your conclusion, because your conclusion is going to do the job of the connecting statement. So let's look at an example. This is that example essay that I've used for a few examples. I've basically just written bits and pieces of it, and at some point I'm going to have to actually write this paper. Anyway, so this is something I'm working on, going off of the topic about disability representation in the CW Arrowverse shows. In addition to the benefits of representation, the DC Source Comics offers multiple disabled characters who can make the leap to the small screen. Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, is paralyzed in the unfortunately sexist comic The Killing Joke, Miller, that becomes Oracle in later comics, Suicide Squad 23. Although unable to walk, as Oracle, she serves as the team's Overwatch-type character, using her skills with technology to be the fighter's eye in the sky, birds of prey. Just as a quick side note, the citation in this paragraph is MLA. So, and you all will be doing APA. So if you all are doing this, doing similar types of writing in citation, remember you need the year for APA. Rather than killing off the character, DC's writers instead cast her in a different role, one that would provide an excellent vehicle to television representation, especially if played by a wheelchair-using actor like Rachel Miner. As the existence of Barbara Gordon proves, disability isn't a reason to keep a character from being utilized in the pages of the comic book. That utilization can easily transition to the television screen, particularly in an ensemble-led show like Legends of Tomorrow and others in the CW's Arrowverse shows. However, Barbara Gordon is not the only character who could fill this role. So you might want to pause the video here and see if you can find the transition, the topic sentence, the evidence, the interpretation, and the connecting statement. Okay, so you should have paused and now you were ready to see if you were right. So here I have it highlighted. The transition is that first, in addition to the benefits of representation. So that signals to my readers that the paragraph before this is probably talking about the benefits of representation. So this is showing how it's connected. And in the topic sentence says that here, I'm going to be presenting DC comic characters with disabilities. My evidence is Barbara Gordon's background in the 3 comics that I'm citing here. And then the interpretation is in that pink fuchsia colors. You can see it's bigger. It's the bulk of the page of the paragraph. And honestly, I could have gone longer with it, but I wanted to keep this paragraph short enough so it'll fit on the slide and be able to be read easily. I'm telling my readers, hey, this is I've given you her background. Let me explain how that background pertains to my ideas of representation and how that representation is important in the comics and then can be moved into the screen, the television screen. In the last sentence, where I say Barbara Gordon is not the only character who could fill this role, that suggests that in my next paragraph, I'm going to talk about more characters with disabilities. So in this situation, this is one of my subtopics, but it's going to be multiple paragraphs. So that's the importance of the connecting statement in the transition, is that it lets your readers know I'm still on this subtopic, but here are examples within this subtopic, or I'm done with this subtopic and I'm moving to the next. I hope that makes sense. Remember, your thesis will be broken down into categories or subtopics, and there should only be 1 per paragraph. If you find that multiple categories are in the same paragraph, then you need to probably do a little bit more interpretation and separate them out. And some categories can be multiple paragraphs, like in my previous example. If I put all of the characters from DC Comics who are disabled into 1 paragraph, it would be like a 2 or 3 page paragraph, which nobody will be able to follow and read effectively. Transitions and topic sentences show your readers if you're sticking with this category or subtopic or moving to another one. And if it looks like it's all source material or all evidence, that's when you need to deepen your interpretation. Now let's talk about introductions and conclusions. If you're like me, introductions are probably the hardest part of a paper for you to write. And if you're not like me, I'm very jealous. An introduction should do 3 things, roughly in this order, but the purpose and rationale and the hook are catching the reader's attention. They can happen together simultaneously, or they can happen in this order. The only thing that cannot change is the thesis statement. It has to be the final sentence of your introduction. So the first paragraph of your paper is the introduction. The thesis statement has to be the last sentence of that paragraph. The first category here, or to catch the attention or provide an overview, think of it as a hook. Just like when you go fishing, the hook is what snags the fish and you reel it in. This is what you're doing, is you're trying to reel in your readers. If I'm sure many of you saw when you were doing your research, there are several essays written on the topics you're looking for. How do you decide whether or not to read something? Often it's the introduction. How can I catch their attention? The introduction can have a much more conversational tone and be a little voicier than some of the paper. So often you want to open with something that's interesting, some quotes, some anecdotes, summaries, a surprising statistic, something that your readers might find surprising, or a quote that you find interesting that sets the tone for your paper. And then also you want to think, are there any terms that my audience needs to know up front, or a quick summary of an overall concept before they're ready to read the bulk of my paper? Is it something that doesn't need its own paragraph or category in the thesis to understand, but your readers need to know what it is? If you can summarize it or define it in a paragraph, in a sentence or two, maybe it needs to be in the introduction. The next stage is the purpose and rationale. This is where you're kind of making your case to your reader. This is why you should read this paper and not this other paper on the same topic. Think, how does my essay fit in with others on the topic? Am I discussing something in a new, unfamiliar, or interesting way? Does my work fill any holes? Or am I adding to a conversation that's already there, but I'm adding a little bit of interesting information, new information, or a new perspective? And then you do your thesis statement, which is your position or the argument you're making, and the criteria or categories or subtopics that will be discussed in the paper in the order they will be discussed. However, you don't bring in the opposing side here, because the thesis should just stand on its own and set up your argument, and you want to appear like you're the expert. Here, you want to think, though, if it's not in the thesis, except for the opposing side, it doesn't belong in the paper. So this is where you want to be careful with how you decide what categories you're using and in what order. And if they change as you write the paper, and that's fine. You may realize that this topic feeds better into subtopic B instead of subtopic C, or category B feeds better into category A. So you may need to switch them around. And that's fine. Just make sure you go back and edit your thesis. So let's look at an example. Let me move this video over. Okay. This is one that I'm doing for that same potential essay. So the CW's tagline is Dare to Defy, and nowhere is that more prevalent than in the Arrowverse shows. These shows take characters from DC Comics and place them in a relatively real-world situation in a weekly series format. The shows themselves are made of diverse actors in diverse roles. Critics have, in fact, praised the Arrowverse for providing racial, gender, and sexual orientation representation. However, there's still more to be done, especially when it comes to disability. Studies into the benefits of representation, the success of shows with positive representation, and the variety of disabled characters from DC's source material comics proves that the time is right for the CW Arrowverse to provide a medium for positive representation of characters with disabilities. So I don't have this one broken down into highlighted colors, but I do have an annotating tool. So see if I can move that away. There we go. So let's look at this. So the first thing I have is my hook. This is my quote. It's Dare to Defy. Quote is how I'm going to try to hook my readers. And then also in the first part, I'm also going to define the Arrowverse. I know that my readers may not quite understand what the Arrowverse is if they're not giant comic book TV nerds like me. But I don't need a whole paragraph in my body of my paper to explain what it is. So I just do a quick definition. And then also I may explain that they have diverse actors and diverse roles. Now the next thing that we're going to look at is how I'm stating my purpose and rationale, or what holes am I filling. So I'm acknowledging here that it's been praised for some representation, and I'm being specific. I might actually go back and add a source for that, but I may not need to because I may bring those later into the paper. But I'm saying basically this is what's already out there. However, this is what's missing. So this is the hole that I feel like my work is filling. So I may not be writing about something that no one else is writing about, but I'm arguing that this needs to belong in the paper or in the Arrowverse. So that's where a little bit of my state purpose and rationale, that's the hole I'm filling. It may not be, I may not be the only writer writing about this need, but it's still a need that's out there. And then I end, I'll do green for the thesis. This is my thesis. So I have my categories or subtopics that I'm going to use. So my readers should expect the first thing they'll read is studies into the benefits of representation. Then they should be able to read successive shows or media with positive representation. And then they should expect to read a variety of disabled characters from DC source material comics. Except for the opposing side, if it doesn't fit in these categories, it doesn't fit in my paper. And this is the order they'll read it. And then my position proves that the time is right for the CW Arrowverse to provide a medium for positive representation of characters with disabilities. Now, as I've written this a little bit and tweaked with it, I've realized that I probably want to put the success of media with positive representation. So I want to broaden that away from shows and just use media. I want to put that last because I think that'll refute the opposing side. I think the opposing side is going to be more likely to talk about how representation can be forced in these shows. So I would switch it in that angle. And then if I switch that order in my paper, then I'm going to switch it in the thesis as well. And then the conclusion. Sorry, the annotation is still there and I don't know how to get rid of it. Anyway, the conclusion does a few things. And like I said, I don't have an example of a good conclusion yet, but it should connect, which means it should connect your paper to the overall conversation. How does your paper fit into an overall discussion around your topic, around your issue, around your semester topic, anything like that? Revisit some of your main points and revisit some of the information in your introduction. Suggest where your readers can find out more information. Ask them a question that gets them thinking. And maybe suggest something they can do. So if I know that a lot of executives are more likely to listen to social media pressure, then I may suggest that my readers use social media to try to get the CW to bring in more disabled characters to the Arrowverse. For an example, if your introduction has to hook the reader and set the stage and kind of make a promise that your paper is worth reading, then the conclusion should elaborate a little bit and make sure that promise was kept. And also think, this is the last place your reader will read your words. They may look at your resources page after this, but most likely the last thing they're going to read is your conclusion. What is the last thought you want your readers to leave with? I hope this presentation has helped, and I look forward to seeing you next week for conferences. If you have any questions at all, please reach out and let me know. And once again, I'm really sorry that I'm unable to make it to class this week. Have a good week.